I've watched that video a couple of times because it's almost like you're opening up a fire hydrant and trying to take a drink out of it. It just comes at you so fast. But I think the cadence of it is actually intentional because there's a sense where, you know, understanding where a lot of that, the manifestations of the anger and the hopelessness that we see when these issues come up and when we see what happened like last summer, it didn't just happen. It wasn't just as if those isolated incidences in and of themselves wouldn't be awful enough, but that there's a boiling over effect in a sense. And so what he's describing there is basically what you hear, and I want to take uh, when you hear this phrase on different political channels, it means different things. And so what I want to do is take the political affiliation out of this phrase and just apply it to what we were listening to here. But when you hear the phrase systemic racism, I think what we just heard is a large part of what that phrase is trying to summon a language to capture. And so what did we hear? You know, we heard of unjust lending policies for black families in America trying to build intergenerational wealth in the one way that most typically people in this country and in our communities do. And so in a sense, that was taken from them. But what else did we hear?
I thought it was the GI Bill stuff.
Uh,
I thought that was really interesting. And so when people put out numbers, then I try to process it to make sure that what they have gathered from that information is what I would gather if I were looking at the information. And so I was thinking about like how many black people were in the army and that kind of stuff. But then I looked at the numbers and I said, well, it doesn't really matter because that two and whatever that other number was, that's
right.
as obvious.
Yeah.
But then the other thing I thought about was like, I think Jimmy's dad did the GI Bill education, so they probably weren't privy to that.
Right.
To be able, because that meant a lot to a lot of young, and I'm going to say men because it's mostly men, but a lot of young men to be able to go to college because
right.
before then they probably couldn't have gone.
Right, that's exactly right. Yeah, it's interesting, and what when we hear this stuff, it's difficult to see it through our eyes because this just hasn't been ingrained in our experience. And that's one of the things that, as he said in Caring, at the end of the video, and the words that we've been using since last summer about having both empathy and imagination. In some ways, we have to step outside of our experience of these things because our experience of these things are very conditioned by our race and the fact that a lot of the system has been we have benefited from. And so in some ways I hear that and I go, gosh, that isn't my experience of it. But I don't have that experience. I don't have the experience of Hispanic people who have had to cross the border and come into our country. I haven't had the experience of being a woman in this country. I haven't had the experience of being elder. I mean, there's all kinds of experiences that I don't have, but that biblically we're called to not only care about but to be involved in bringing about justice and mercy and following those ethics of the kingdom of God and being involved in those policies and calling things out when we see things that are wrong. But what did you guys think about one of the things that I noticed when I was in seminary living in St. Louis? For a brief time, I was a guard at a detention center. And the numbers that he talked about in terms of the rate of incarceration, the percentages that went across racially, and then the amount of nonviolent drug offenders that were in prison was that probably was conservative based on my very limited experience of the criminal justice system. But what did that, as you heard that in the policing policies and sort of the paramilitary lean that seems to have come into, when we lived in St. Louis, I lived about a mile and a half from Ferguson, Missouri. Ferguson, Missouri is a nice suburb St. Louis. It is not what you would, look at as a dangerous or a bad neighborhood. But when I saw the armored personnel carrier coming down that street in Ferguson, Missouri, I just went, okay, I know what's going on is bad, but I'm not sure I understand why the Ferguson Police Department even had an armored personnel carrier. And I'll tell you where they got the money to buy that from. You want to know where that was? From drug seizures and forfeitures. That's where the money comes from. I'm not saying that it's corrupt. I'm just saying that it's not coincidental that when you work your way back that you see these sorts of things. But what did you think about the kind of the policing and the law enforcement side of things?
I think, did he say that the incidence of drug use is the same for white and black?
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Okay.
He said it was the same, but
Is that what
prosecuted
the
so much
data?
more heavily for black individuals.
Yeah, I just like to see and that's based on the number of charges that are made, or?
I assume the number of convictions, because being charged doesn't mean that the case doesn't get thrown out or something, but it sounds like the overwhelming
Is
majority.
he talking about it being the same number or the same percentage of rate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Because I think we really need to talk about drug, and I don't, there may have been disparate racial impact on the policies, but I don't know that I'm ready to buy that the policies were built off of racism. I think they were built off of trying to solve the drug problem.
Right.
And the drug problem is, it's gonna put whoever does it, regardless of race, at a disadvantage. In terms of, and the one thing that I see in all these incidents, like Ferguson or Minneapolis, other than the Breonna Taylor, not all of them, but quite a number of the ones where is one common thing is that there was pretty high levels of drugs in the person's system, and so I think drugs still need to be. I mean, we can talk about. Let's put it this way: I think we need to care about drug use because, and I think a lot of what was tried was nobly instigated. It wasn't that they were trying to be racist. I think they were trying to solve the drug problem. Now, we all know that we hadn't won the drug war.
No, and that's been going on since the Nixon administration, right? I mean, that's been a long, that didn't just come up with the Reagan and the Clinton administration. This is a 70 years, 60 years long, process.
Yeah.
I want to show my ignorance here. Crack cocaine versus
Powder cocaine.
powder cocaine.
That's correct.
From watching Breaking Bad, which is my only way I would.
Yeah.
Well, he
Yes,
was an
my favorite
excellent
repertoire.
man.
Most of
I
the
think it's an
conversations
excellent
are pretty
report.
But he was making meth.
So why don't we?
He
so
wasn't making.
He was making meth versus
Yeah.
crack cocaine. So, but when we stick with the crack versus powder cocaine,
Mhm.
so crack cocaine would have some other chemical properties, but for lack of a better term, the per high cost is one more expensive than the other.
No, well, the powder cocaine, I think, was higher, cost more. I think they were both equally addictive. And, if you're going to stretch your drug dollar, powder cocaine is probably not the way to go. Because crack you could take the same ounce or amount of cocaine, but when you're making it into free-base crack cocaine, I don't know why I know this. I never, but when you make it into that, it's cheaper, and you can sell more of it out of that same amount of cocaine.
It goes further.
Yes.
But the actual nature of the high, is it?
It's not more potent.
I don't think so.
I'm looking it up
It's
here.
the difference
Because that's
between
what it was sold.
sugar and
Legislation was sold.
sucralose. It's like I could get several pounds of sugar, or I could get several pounds of Splenda, and it would do the same for you in a way. But-
I'm
It's
kind of
a
going with
refined version of
kind of what you were asking.
cocaine.
I'm asking, at its
But
base level.
cocaine is a pure substance. Powder cocaine is a pure substance than crack.
So I mean,
is
I
what you're
guess
saying.
the assumption is that powder cocaine is a better high.
Mhm.
But if in reality, the big differentiator between the two is cost.
Yes.
That's exactly right.
Then it kind of goes back and say, well, and so you go back and you look how we criminalize one form of cocaine versus the other.
That's right.
And it's really amazing how this kind of gets perpetuated.
That's in the enforcement side of things too. You would get, if you were arrested, regardless of race, but if you were arrested with an ounce of powder cocaine, you would get a certain number. If you were arrested with an ounce of crack cocaine, it's exponentially more use. So the interdiction and the actual charging was different, even though it was still cocaine. But again, you know, powder cocaine was seen largely as a white party drug, especially in the 80s when all of this was being written. But then when crack came along, it was seen as an inner city drug that you could get for $5, where that same amount would be more if it was just powder cocaine. So there, and I agree with you. I don't think that the laws were written from the standpoint of let's target one race over another. There is, however, in enforcement, there does seem to be at least an argument to be made that there is a disproportionate number here, and that's not attacking the police. We as a country are I think we are the jailingest country on the planet. Now, you know, you don't really know what the numbers are coming out of China. You don't really know what the numbers are coming out of North Korea. And I love this country. I mean, I'm not saying I'm anti-American, but I think he made a very good point in saying that we've made this an issue of criminality and not public health. And if we approach this as an issue of criminality, then you get what really started to throw me off is when I saw the proliferation of private prisons, where the privatization of prisons. Well, the only way that you make money on a prison is to fill it. And so enforcement and drug interdiction, particularly in this country, have created our prison population and made it, you know, much higher than it is in other countries for similar crimes.
Yeah, I sort of looked at what's going on with marijuana legalization, and I had no idea. But my assumption is that marijuana is much more prevalently used by whites versus black. Would be my speculation.
Yeah, I don't know those numbers.
But the interesting is that we have built all these prisons for one type of drug, but then we're decriminalizing
Another
what is another prison. It's interesting.
Crack
Put
is
Jim
made
Crow
by
on there also.
processing cocaine with baking soda, heating it up.
With baking
Well,
soda.
so that's my point, Jimmy.
So
all
you're
I'm saying
extending-
is, it's
You're stretching.
you're stretching the potency like
Baking
you would
soda.
be when you're making
Yeah,
a
but
product.
you may make it more receptive too, but I don't know that there's any difference in the amount of high.
Well, here we go. When cocaine is snorted,
Yeah.
it takes about 1 to 5 minutes, and it peaks in 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, and then it goes away in a couple hours. The crack fact takes hold in a minute, peaks in 3 to 5 minutes, and only lasts 30 to 60 minutes. So it doesn't last as long, but it gets you up high quicker.
So, you know, if you'd like to have more information on cocaine use and the
Yeah.
correct way to go about it,
But it makes it. You want to know why? Okay, so I mean, you know, okay, like I went back and when I was doing some education stuff. But anyway, we were looking at policy and milk in the schools. So why do we have milk in the schools? And it had to do with the dairy farmers had too much milk. The government bought it and put it in the schools. And that's where all that stuff started. So you want to go, where did the policy come from? I mean, I'm curious about, you know, why we decided that. Was it that, you know, the police go, oh my gosh, you know, we're seeing all this stuff and they're out on the streets or something. I mean, yeah, you wonder what was the,
But
Yeah,
I
there you
always,
go.
the money.
there
That's
you go.
Most of the
which
decisions.
is what
you-
that was.
I
Yeah.
think what Phil Vischer's getting at though is just like with the teachers who aren't recognizing giftedness in a student. A prosecutor's job is to bring charges against
That's
someone,
right.
but then they're going against a grand jury of their peers.
That's right.
And so the fact that 6 times as many of folks that are black are getting convicted has to do more with society
Mhm.
potentially and their peers than it does even with the actual DAs and prosecutors.
Yeah, I haven't read a study that I've followed in terms of feeling like the way that it was done was statistically correct, but I would be curious how many drug offenses are pleaded out.
Mhm.
I would probably imagine that the vast majority don't go to trial. I mean, public defenders are overwhelmed as it is, and I'm wading into waters like that. I act like I know what I'm talking
Yeah.
about, but it certainly seems like there is a lack of incentive to see these things go to trial, and so it's easier to just go ahead and cut a good deal and then be done with it. However, that the downstream impact of that for that individual offender who was possessing, possibly, let's just stick with people who were possessing, not distributing, not involved with violent crime, but just who were possessing it. The downstream effect of that is utterly crippling, and can be in our system the way that it's set up. So, but why don't we shift gears? What about the Jim Crow laws and the policies? Now, in that case, it did seem that there was a decided bias that was being implemented with these policies. I don't think this was.
Those were racially motivated.
Yeah, that's right, exactly. I don't think we can get around that.
But wouldn't you love to hear the conversation with that one? I mean, we probably heard it at our grandmother's house or our
no
great
question.
grandmother's house about
Yeah.
why those worked and why it was necessary and it was good for black people and for the white
Mhm.
people. But we can pretend all that stuff.
Yeah, this I think is one of the most bruising legacies that we have in our country is the continuation, but for lack of a better word, the creativity that was employed in order to maintain policies that were clearly unjust and clearly not consistent with our own Constitution and saying that all men are created equal, but having separate but equal, and hearing other people's experience of that, just the way that it just seemed like it was accepted, but it depending on where you lived and how you were raised and all of those things, your view of that, what could be, some people thought, well, there's nothing wrong with it. It worked out fine.
Everything's good.
The system works. And then other people who, again, they look at that and they say, this is yet another aspect of what we have institutionally seen in our country. And so when these incidences of violence come up, I don't think it didn't just happen. What we saw in Ferguson, what we saw, and I'm not saying that there wasn't a good reason for the police officers to intervene with those individuals. And I don't know if we know the full story behind some of those instances. Many others have come to light in which it was very clearly an issue of enforcement and an issue of not following policy and procedure. But again, where we see these things, this is where in our country, as we hear that, I think it's difficult to separate the politics and separate the party affiliation when we hear this phrase from what actually happened. Because as soon as people say, every time something happens, people will get on TV and say, we need to have an honest conversation about race in our country. As if every conversation up to that point has been dishonest.
There's no
or somehow.
honesty. They're not talking about these things.
Exactly. And that's the thing, is that people who pay their mortgages, there are professionally outraged people in our culture that will find problems anywhere. But then there are also people who will defend and obscure and move away from these realities because they're paid to have a position. and almost to play a character in these conversations. And so, going, if we're going to have an honest conversation about race, television isn't the place to have it. It just isn't. I don't know what the answer is other than for that conversation to be conversations that we are having and that we have with our friends and with people that we know. And that we see, when we see injustice, I think it's our calling as believers to resist it. Now, that can take on a number of forms, and I don't believe that violent resistance, I don't believe that breaking laws and things like that is what is prescribed in doing that. But if we don't do anything, that actually is doing something. And what that's doing is continuing to see this system continue to hum along the way that it is. And so there's some sort of, it feels like we're at a place where we can take another step forward, but we can't look to the politicians to do that because that's not, their job is to get reelected. I'm very cynical about politics, but I think their job is to get reelected. Their job isn't to make things right. If those two things happen to align, great. But otherwise, I don't think that's their primary interest. I don't think that we can look to government in general for this. I think it comes from us. I think it comes from churches. I think it comes from believers, not just carrying on the legacy of the civil rights era, as Dr. King put it out there, but also Jesus's, that the kingdom and bringing those ethics into this world as we look at these things and be willing to say we missed it. Things were wrong, they were unjust. And then moving towards making things right.
I don't think we were educated well about Jim Crow. I didn't know until lately. I mean, because we weren't taught everything.
Mm-hmm.
But my son taught me that after Reconstruction, you would be very surprised now to see how many black people were legislators and mayors and held, lots of leadership. And that's why Jim Crow happened, was people were so jealous of that.
Right.
We weren't taught that.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden there was the 60s.
Right.
Yeah, and I look back at Jim Crow as a reaction to.
Oh, it was.
Right.
And,
Yes.
and I don't mean this as a political statement, but I look at what's going on even in this state right now regarding voter fraud effort. It's what we're saying. The rationale is that people are voting who shouldn't be voting. We're going to fix it. But the net result of fixing it is we're going to make it much more difficult to vote. Is that a fair?
So it's like Jim Crow's kind of creeping
That's
in
kind of what
again.
I guess what I'm saying, and it's
Yeah.
there's no. The comment is, well, this is not racist, but these steps are being taken in large part by one party because they see a potential threat.
Well, I think there are bipartisan commissions that were founded, including Jimmy Carter, that recommended against these things because it does open itself up to fraud. And I basically think it's racist to say, well, black people are too stupid to be able to get an ID. I mean, I think blaming everything on racism is not. So I think we can have an honest conversation, but calling that Jim Crow laws because you want somebody to have an ID, calling it where you want to have a little bit more control to make sure that only the person, one person, one vote, that you're not sending ballots out to everybody so somebody could fill it out and turn it in. As well as I have great concerns about the voting machines and their ability to be hacked. That's probably my biggest concern is election fraud, not voting fraud.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's good evidence that there has been election fraud where people can interfere in the computer processes, where it gets transferred from one place to another. And so I think we can have an honest conversation about that, but I don't subscribe that having to have an ID or having to show up or fill something out but particularly showing ID is basically racist.
Yeah, and that's where,
And I think politicians try to sell that because, as you mentioned, they're trying to get elected.
Right.
And they're counting a lot on
Yeah.
racism to get elected.
And maybe that's kind of my point, and that is, it's a kind of a wink, if you would. We'll put these things in, but,
It's somebody who usually goes right down the middle. It is so frustrating to hear those things because you want to believe that everything is fair. But you can listen to the left. I'm not good with white and left. You can listen to one side, you listen to the other side, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And there's concerns on both sides.
Yes.
And it's concerns voiced by not only the people who are wanting to be elected, but some of their constituents too. And I just, in my Pollyanna view, it's kind of like, can we get together and come up with a system that we kind of both feel good about?
Yeah.
Surely we can.
And I think hopefully the outcome of this past election cycle will be looking at vulnerabilities that we have in our system, or potential vulnerabilities, because it does seem like there are those out there. That my cynicism creeps in where I go, well, would these politicians from this side of the aisle be talking about that if they're a guy in one? And that's where I look at it and just go, if we're going to have the conversation, let's have the conversation regardless of who's in the White House.
Right.
Because if we are concerned about justice and fairness and our electoral process being, safe, that shouldn't have to do or shouldn't come up every 4 years when the person that I wanted to win didn't.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's odd to me that Georgia and Arizona all of a sudden want to take a look at this because they had been historically red states up until this year. And that, now again, you could say, Matt, that's you being cynical. You're right. you're probably right. But I don't think that's a coincidence at the same time.
I've worked with poor people so long, though, that there's so many similarities of systemic discrimination against people in poverty as there is to people who are minorities. And it's not just the having an ID, and I don't think anybody's too stupid to get an ID. It's just that there are so many people in poverty that literally don't, to them to be able to go and take a paper to a notary is a huge undertaking. And so it's just an access problem. And I mean, that's just one example, but people in poverty are at a gigantic disadvantage in many, many ways.
That's something that I think is interesting too in these conversations. I think what we're talking about is systemic racism, but we also have a parallel issue in our country, which is what do we do? Because it's not just about race. It's not less than race, right?
And I think there's one thing that's left off of there, and that's because I grew up through the '60s and '70s, and again, it's sort of like the drug enforcement and the drug laws. I think they were well intentioned, but I think some of our attempts to solve welfare actually created more problems. Before the Great Society, I want to say 70% of black families stayed together.
I mean, there were some
And now
unintended
what,
consequences
one in
of some of that.
1 in 8 black child is born out of wedlock.
He actually addresses this in next week's video. It's actually very, very good.
And when you go back to the whole drug thing, and if you're really trying to address some of these things, you say, well, what in the law is, but then you also got to go back and say, well, what do we do so that children, regardless of race, and particularly for the black community, because yes, it is the spirit. But what do we do? What can be effective, I guess?
Yeah, the breakdown of the family is, I think most sociologists agree, and Rachel, you probably know more of this than I do, but most sociologists agree that the breakdown of the family has been, if not as destructive, probably more than any of the racial things that we see, any of the socioeconomic things that that the breakdown of the nuclear family has been one of the greatest catalysts, at least in our country, to perpetuate a lot of the problems that we're seeing.
It's probably one of the biggest things statistically that you could track with
That's right.
People's chances at success.
Yeah, that's right.
Make
That's
sure I
right.
understand, I know we're about out of time, but we came together to talk about racism, but we're also stepping back and we're saying this has uncanny parallel with social-economic matters.
No doubt.
Absolutely.
Now, is there something else out there that y'all mentioned? Yeah. So are you saying next week he's going to be dealing with the socioeconomic aspect?
He talks more about that there. He talks about the breakdown of the family, and then just that basically the percentage chance of a child to be able to pull themselves out of both within the system if they're a black child or a minority, but particularly black kids in our culture, but then also without an intact two-family household.
Pardon me, I'm a little thick here.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the categories, racism would be a category, social economic status would be a
Disparity.
kind of, disparity could be a category.
Right.
And then are we saying that the breakdown in family is a third category?
I don't think
or
it'd be a third category. I think it would be a subset of both of those two main categories.
When I was working, let's see, I graduated, I got to think of numbers. So somewhere in the mid '80s, I was working in a health department in South Carolina and working with families there as a nurse. And it was fascinating to me to some of the young ladies would get pregnant to get out of the house, or that was a good thing to happen. I don't know, let's don't say they were intentional in it. It was a good thing to happen because what that did was that gave them some economic independence from their family. But what it also did to them with the welfare, what it also did is it took them away from their family. Right. And we know how teenagers are. And they were not making good decisions. And they would end up that the child and the mom would be in this chaos for I don't know how many years, finally grow up a little bit and go back home, and grandmother's there taking care of everything. And it's just unintended consequences of what happened with that.
Yeah,
So basically, whenever the government gets involved,
It's
well, but in the latest 1.9 billion,
true.
what people, there's a big component with the child
Income tax credit.
income, and it's actually not even an income tax credit. It's families are actually going to receive payment,
Money.
Oh, that's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
so you want to have more babies.
and I don't know. I don't think the American public understands what we just. It got kind of thrown in there,
Right.
And I'm not arguing for or against, but what I guess I am realizing, in the last 6 months, I've kind of gotten involved with in more of an international group that's opened my eyes to what happens in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe. And they sometimes they admire America and then they kind of laugh at America and what we do. It's really kind of interesting, and they're so well tuned in. But the entitlements, if I can use, that they are get, basically they continue to get paid through all of this COVID.
Well, and just to point out, because I know that that's a terrible thing to think about people being incentivized by money to have children. I know that's a terrible thing to think
Yeah,
about.
but that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, they took that away.
Well,
Because what happened was that you could not have your husband, you couldn't
You
have
couldn't
the
have-
man, the baby's daddy, living with you.
yeah.
They've taken away a lot of that.
But
so.
many people believe and feel that that's still the case, and many people believe that there are women that want to have babies to have more of a tax refund. But the reality is just to get back to the meat and potatoes of this. Even if the government sends us, $3,000 per kid or whatever, none of that makes up for the loss of a two-parent household. And people in poverty and minorities, when you think that 1 in 14 black men my age are in jail,
Well, it gets to
are
be where it's a norm.
incarcerated.
It's like they said norm.
That's the norm. So that means that of all of the, well, 5% of Dalton Public Schools is a black child. So do whatever math there. 1 out of 14 of them that their daddy is in jail, incarcerated. So that's kind of what it's talking about, because we know that having a 2-parent household puts you 20 times ahead of a single parent household in terms of your opportunity for success, and regardless of race. So again, I see a lot of parallels with poverty, and I think it goes along with the fact that minorities are in poverty more than.
But I think that
people.
terminology cuts so many people off from listening.
It does. It
And
does.
it's
hard for people to hear that.
I really wish
systemic
we could come up with
racism.
another term.
Yeah.
just because
Because it's
that-
not,
that
it's
has-
really not reflective, and what what you want to say is it wasn't because somebody was racist that those policies happened.
Right.
Not all, some of them, but
Sure.
but a good many of them, it was not. I mean, there's some unintended kind of things that were going on.
The first it caused when people use numbers in the wrong way, because both sides can put forward an argument based on numbers that's not, statistics can be used to lie.
Sure.
When you're saying equal numbers, well, what does that mean? Does that mean as a percentage of white people versus percentage of black people? Does that mean that, there's 50 of one and 50 of the other?
Right. Yeah. What I had to wrestle through in working in that prison was looking at the inmate population and trying to decide, is there something in enforcement that's disproportionate, or is there just a racial commitment to crime in this community? And there may be points in between, but I think there was something wrong with enforcement. Now, I can't put percentages or numbers or put studies behind it. I can just tell you what I saw. But I also, on visiting days on Sunday afternoons was visiting day. I can remember in all my time there, one intact family coming to visit an inmate. It was almost always an uncle and an aunt or a grandmother. Very rarely did you see an intact family, almost never, visiting. And that's, again, it goes back to the point of this larger problem, as the concentric circles go out from the center. I agree with you. I think this phrase has been hijacked, and there are a constellation of agendas that's been attached to it. So I'm up for a different phrase, but whatever the phrase we choose to use, we still need to deal with the reality.
I
Is
think
your
that-
experience in the prison system? I'm just curious as to people that were brought up in a church with a faith background versus people that were not. I know, was there? Because I'm also thinking that there may be one other thing down here, and that is we've over time we've worked pretty hard to take religion out of all of our educational processes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it used to be pretty heavy in the school, and you can argue that maybe it shouldn't be, but
there was they were I can't remember, and I really shouldn't say it out loud because I don't really remember where it came from.
That's okay.
But
It's
they-
only going on to.
Okay.
It's only going on in the World Wide Web.
But they were asking like college students about whether they believed that college age students. Let me rephrase that because they weren't all in college, but whether they believed in God and did God have any part in their lives. And the highest percentage was for black students, which I mean that says something, right? I mean, I just thought that was fascinating. But they'd say whether you
I've not
believe.
watched this next video, and Jim, I don't mean this as a political question, but I think the question I'm asking is, all right, how do you untangle all this?
Mhm.
It's part of the challenge. And then the question is, what would be some of the solutions? And it seems like it falls down to, well, does the government have the answers? And my normal inclination is, no, the government can't do a better job.
history would tell you no.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the next question would be, well, then what would? Right? Is that religious institution? Is that the family unit? I mean, I'm not a sociologist.
Right.
Well, what I
A
wanna
lot
know
of-
is, I wanna get down to the micro level. I wanna know what I can do
Right.
to impact that. To impact policies, or what we can do to impact, Brother Big Sister,
Mhm.
the after-school things
Yeah.
that they do.
I think that part of it is, it's bouncing off of his word, okay, so we care. And so because of that, we begin to look in our community and look in our circles of influence to see who is working in these areas now, I think is part of the approach. And then seeing if that's where God's calling us to plug in. I mean, we all can pray, we know that. We all can continue to repent of, just sort of either an apathy, or if we were raised in this and didn't see a problem with it, that there's a sense of, okay, I need to acknowledge that this was part of my normal, that I didn't contribute, I didn't write the laws, I wasn't arresting people, I wasn't doing this. But from the standpoint of saying, I've got to pull back from just sort of being in the current and step out of that so that I can begin to see and understand and listen to these people more who have experienced this. And then begin to, one of the big words that came up last summer that we as a church, and I say Big C Church, we're not good at lament, but we see it all throughout Scripture. And what, just basically lament is saying we recognize that we live in a broken world, and that because we live in a broken world, there are things that need to move us to empathy and to growth in areas that maybe because it hasn't impacted us, it
So
doesn't.
lament is not passive.
Not at all.
Okay.
No, I think lament means that impulse and that discipline then moves us towards, it motivates us moving towards something, rather than just saying, boy, this is awful. Well, what are you gonna do? But actually saying, no, we need to take this next step forward. And so the luxury we have being in the community this small is that we know who's already out there doing those things, and so how do we plug in? And in some ways we already are through the missions committee and through the money and support and the volunteers that we have people doing things, but to continue that impulse and to continue that discipline of lament and go, okay, how does this then move my heart towards people that have been suffering, my brother and sister who have been suffering, and how do I take that gospel hope and kingdom, but then also how do I take me to that and love them well, because that's what we're called to do. So, well, with that, I want to be respectful of your time. Great conversation, y'all. That was fun. But let me close this in prayer. Father, we look at all of these things that have happened in the past, and we look at what's going on now, and we confess that in some ways we just feel overwhelmed and kind of lost in the process of trying to decide what to do or how to do it. But we have that impulse to be a part of bringing about your kingdom and your righteousness and your justice in this world. And we pray, God, that that would move us to lament, to repentance, but also, Father, that those would then compel us and move our hearts to begin to look and to see in our community those agencies and organizations and people that are involved in these processes of making people whole again, and to bring about healing and hope in our community, and that we would engage those and however we're able to do so. And in doing all of that, Father, we recognize that you love us, Father, that you've been so gracious and merciful to us. And Father, in doing that, we pray that we would be agents of healing and grace and mercy in our community and in this world. And we thank you for your love. We thank you for your Son. It's in his name that we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We go hit stop real fast.
Yeah, I keep forgetting that.
If all I known was on, I would talk a lot more, much more.